shall we go on then to The War of the Worlds?
I think we should, Scott. We return to H.G. Wells again, and an adaptation of perhaps the most famous science fiction novel of all time, The War of the Worlds, with a screenplay written by the pseudonymous, but presumably Thackeray-loving, Barry Lyndon, produced by George Pal, who directed another Wells adaptation, The Time Machine, in 1960, and directed by Byron Haskin. Chances are you're familiar with the broad strokes of this. Martians have been watching Earth for a while, and decide to drop by and take over the place by means of meteorite-like capsules fired across the solar system. Human weapons are useless against them. They devastate the planet until tiny, unconsidered bacteria defeat them where we, with our huge brains and technological might, were unable to. Microscopic organisms bringing a technologically advanced civilization to a grinding halt. It's really pushing the bounds of credibility, that one. As opposed to the Victorian Britain of the novel, the film updates the principal action to mid-20th century California, and the book's narrator is replaced as protagonist by Gene Barry's Dr. Clayton Forrester, an atomic scientist, and, naturally, nuclear weapons are used against the invaders, albeit fruitlessly. The narrative arc is otherwise similar, just with everything absolutely rubbish in comparison. Whereas the book dealt from the beginning with the horrific destructive power of the Martians and particularly the death of humans, this film version is oddly bloodless, with only a handful of deaths seen, and the bulk of destruction being at the expense of property as Los Angeles is destroyed. A particularly surprising thing given that this film carried an X certificate in UK, meaning at the time viewers must be 16 or older, not what X certificate ended up being. While not an intention of the filmmakers, I am personally very much considering this focus on property rather than life an indictment of US capitalism and what it holds dear. And that makes it another reason I find that I really don't care for this adaptation. Gone entirely is the harvesting of humans as fodder for the Martians, or the threatened death of the planet by the red weed. And likewise conspicuous by its absence is the novel's disdain for religion, and particularly the clergy, with the film instead promoting one priest to the role of a martyr, and, in a seeming effort to stick two fingers up to Wells, ending in a church. It really is a terrible adaptation, with there are some Martians and bacteria win in the end, being most of what remains of the source. Even the opening deviates unnecessarily from the book, while beginning with its famous opening passage, adding in some nonsense about the gas giant Jupiter having a rocky, inhospitable surface, and some other unnecessary explanations of why Earth was targeted, when it boils down to Mars is dying, Earth is closest. A compressed time frame also does the film no favours. It seems that the events must take place over months, but it's actually 3 days. Nor does a leading man with all the charisma of a tree. If there's any interest in the film, it's in the special effects which, while quaint now, quaint's the polite word I'll use, were impressive at the time. Though I wonder if the Martian shields, quite clearly bell jars of the miniatures, were equally obvious then as now. And for the presence of the cliched line, "How long was I out?" delivered by Forrester as he returns to consciousness. I've long disliked that as a ridiculous thing for any human being to say, and only said either in films or by someone repeatedly exposed to it by its use therein. And I was very surprised to hear it here, having assumed it a much more modern plague. That really is it for interest though, as it's simply a really bad, very boring film with the added kicker of being produced with the visually repugnant, super-saturated 1950s Technicolor process that I am an avowed anti-fan of. It has, however, given me a desire to revisit Steven Spielberg's 2005 adaptation, which I feel now I may have been too harsh on at the time.
Yes, I too would like to go back and listen to that, if nothing else. I've got a pair of nice headphones now, and I'd like to hear some of the sound design, because it was awesome in that film. The one true shining.
The sound of the... Yeah, the sound of the kind of... The thing called in Half-Life Striders. They're very like that, aren't they?
Yes, the tripods. The critical thing of the book, which this film doesn't have because they all float for some reason. This version of The War of the Worlds, I don't want to say lazy. That's probably not. There's obviously a lot of people working very hard on it, but this whole thing felt like the first draft of everything. It's like the first draft of the script, the first draft of the concept art for it, the first draft of the special effect, the creature design, all that, because it all just looked perfunctory, and all the performances look like the first take. This feels like it is something that needs several layers of polish before it could actually be good. Yeah, there's a lot of things that I don't like in it, and almost nothing that I did like. I somehow,
yes,
somehow I didn't hate it, but yeah, I very much didn't like it, and I can't find anything positive to say about it. In particular, I'm glad you brought up that religion point, because it's something that's kind of been going through a few of these films. They do keep feeling the need to kind of link religion back into science for some reason. I don't know if this is just the way to get past selling it in America. I'm not sure what the point of it is, because a lot of the time it makes no sense to add it into this. Same in Forbidden Planet that we get to next, and it's shown up in, I think, all the other films we've spoken about so far, apart actually from There Stood Still. It's added in to no benefit. It's just wasting time in a film. It's very strange. Don't know if this is just a cultural thing.
I assumed that had a lot to do with the kind of the very Puritan and Christian nature of like kind of mainstream America. But it just feels particularly egregious that because Wells himself is a secularist, and it's the curate in the book who's kind of one of the most feeble and despicable characters.
Yes.
So that they not just did they ignore that, but kind of like almost attack that in here. It's kind of offensive.
Yeah.
And to put the finale in the church, suggesting like God saved them. Like, there is I think when when the bacteria are seen to have killed the Martians in the book.
Yeah.
The narrator does say something about like, you know, kind of like basically they were killed, brought low by the most humble creatures that God saw fit to put on the earth. I mean, it doesn't feel religious. Victorian England, it's Victorian Britain, it's very much like kind of what people would do, but also it's kind of part of the language. It doesn't kind of go against his more secularist take.
Yes.
But this is like, no, there's
you directly prayed to God and God saves you.
It's offensive, and because there's nothing there in the source material at all.
Yeah, and it misses all the best bits of the book, which I think Spielberg at least gets into a bit. But yeah, all that harvesting, all the horror of like the occupation and the earth being reduced to rubble basically by everything, all that's all the good stuff.
That's the thing. There's no horror in this, Scott.
Yeah,
like the book begins like with the cylinder lance on the common, and then after a couple of days, I think, it starts unscrewing and the heat beam vaporizes people. It's like hundreds of people die within the first few chapters of the book. Whereas in this, there's 3 people who end up there alone and nobody knows what's happened to them. You just see their outline later. It's like, this film's supposed to be bloody because the book is bloody. The book is full of death.
Yeah.
Because it's a real existential threat. But here it's like, no, they killed some buildings. Think of the insurance losses.
Yeah. Oh no, you've destroyed the instruments. Oh, by the way, where's the woman I love? Yes, it's just not very good. I don't know if we've got a whole lot more to say about it other than it was very disappointing. This was the film that I kind of thought I'd seen this, but I don't think I had. I could have sworn I'd seen the original War of the Worlds, this adaptation of War of the Worlds, but I don't believe that I had. Otherwise, I'm sure I would remember that I didn't want to watch it again, because it's just not very good.
Yeah. Again, it's always the danger too of, because we hadn't seen any of these films, like some films we knew of. I'll say I largely put this list together and Scott went, that seems reasonable, but it's like things that I was aware of the reputation of, like Metropolis, and you wanted to watch. Some of them, though, are just put in by looking for lists of what people say are the best science fiction films of all time. The bulk of this list actually came from a list on Rotten Tomatoes, but that originated on some other website that doesn't exist now. But it's the danger of like using other people's lists. I mean, we've fallen foul of it before, but you know, there's so many films. How do you pick them?
Yeah,
this was quite high up on the list of like considered a real classic of science fiction. And I was like, okay, I'll put this in, and it's a genuine classic story.
Yeah,
so it probably is the most famous science fiction novel of all time. I struggle to think of anything that's better known than War of the Worlds. And I watched this like, oh, this is absolute garbage.
Yes.
Sorry, this is absolute garbage.
Yes.
I learned my lesson now. it's trash. It's such a poor adaptation, and it's so strange that it's so bloodless. Like, where's kind of the accelerated time frame really doesn't help. It's like, it's like it's happened in a couple of days. There's not really so much threat there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just rubbish.
Yes, Wells did it better.
Weirdly enough.